1972 U.S. 30 Dragster. The Coca-Cola bottle from Chicagoland presents the Mr. Chevrolet USA Super Dual Body Car Showdown. From Pennsylvania, it's three-time national champion Jungle Jim Lieberman. From Dallas, Texas, Martin Martin's Drag-On Vega. From Alabama, the bold one, Bobby Wood. From New Jersey, Bruce Wesson's fantastic USA 1.
That is badass intro. That's an awesome intro. Yeah.
That is the best. I get the little goosebumps every single time when it fades down and you start to hear those things. I'm getting them right now. Yeah.
You're like literally at the 1,000-foot mark. It totally takes you there to the 1,000-foot mark as they go by at like 185 miles an hour in those days, right?
Yeah. So and when the clutches are all locked up and all that fuel is going in there and it's eating at that point. It
is freight training. So we got a lot of people in here already tonight, man. They all popped in like last minute. What was a Fab Race Mod Repeat? Oh man, are you doing better?
Me?
Are you less sickly this week?
Yes. I took the sicko off there. I'm actually I'm just on the end of the cough stuff. So yeah, I feel fine.
On the mend. Sweet. Yeah. Scarlett the Four-Eyed Cuda's in here. Colleen Tebow, Two Hacks Jeff, David James, hello from Iowa. Man, is it snowing up there yet? Let's see. We got Jason's Garage has shown up. Howdy. Mopar Man 1978. Auto Salvage Outlaws. What is happening? Hell, everyone. Man. We're not there yet, but we're on our way. Dean Stevenson, LP94, which is Lars out of the JB's little shop camp. Let's see. And Lars, if you didn't know this, drove the Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood or AHRA monkey bike last year at the No Name National. So,
that was him? Okay,
cool. Yeah, that was him. Yeah, you probably saw him beard flapping in the wind.
I saw him. Yeah. I remember you pointing it out. Hey, that's him. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah, that dude's got an awesome beard. I'm very jealous. I can't grow one like that. It literally just gets all fuzzy, and I just got to cut it off. I've never grown a beard. Being in the Navy, I couldn't grow one. Right.
Well, here's a little fun fact. You see this right here?
I'm
almost 50, and I've never shaved one time in my life.
I can literally grow something, but it's like. It drives me nuts. Like it'll get in my mouth, and I'm like, oh, I hate this. I gotta shave it off, right?
Yeah.
So every time I start to get a good one going, I'm like, I hate this thing.
Yeah.
So Uncle Squirrel is in here. Personally, he's blaming squirrels. We got Kevin from Idaho. Hello from Idaho. Let's see. Dean Stevenson, mostly old parts and Russ Patrick.
What's going on, Patrick?
Yeah, well, it's like the whole crew is in here. Clint Street Machines is in here. He's saying, howdy, everyone. And Clint did me a solid last week. He went and picked me up rear end for that 63 special.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think it's a 9.3 Pontiac. I don't know. We gotta do some testing to determine which one chews up more power. And I'm assuming that 9.3 Pontiac with the high point angle, like you said, where it is, and it having such a large ring gear, it's most likely going to chew through every ounce of power I can make. The car will never even move. The Buick 350 is so weak, so it'll just.
And 8 3/4 is a good rear end, but it's definitely not the strongest, and it has its limits. But for what you're doing, I think it's going to be just fine.
Well, and I was so geared up to do the 8 3/4, but. I called Chris Cox, who's going to fabricate the rear end at Fab Race Mod Repeat, right? And he said, dude, that's the right rear end to have in the car. If you were to build that in 1963 or 4, that would be the rear end you used.
Yeah,
right.
He's correct. That's exactly what you would use. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it may be a little bit stronger. I don't know if I need any more strength, but it definitely fits the motif of the car. So NSB Custom Cars is here. Howdy, fellers. Let's see. JB's even in here. So we got Lars and JB, LP94 and JB's little shop. So let's see. Man, is that my computer making all that noise?
Not me.
Probably. All right. Well, let's get down to some brass tacks. We got it's your normal live. Man, I need to turn down the brightness on this. I look like I'm looking into the sun or I'm welding as I'm trying to do this live.
You know that I got to tell you that I have a nice little studio lights here all set up. You know, kind of gives a nice little glow without glowing on me. But basically, what I got going on, we'll talk about what I got going on. I have a fuel injected Slant 6 now with a throttle body on it, and I'm actually a little stoked of it. I can go out there at any time, turn the key, it instantly starts, and I can walk away from it, and it warms up on its own and does everything it's supposed to do.
So you're happy with it then? Hey, that's a lot better. I look more pink now, but less like I'm going to have welding flash by the end of this live. So
I'm actually happy with it. Yeah, but there's something I want to do. I definitely want to put a fuel pump in the tank, and I want to turn up the fuel pressure to 58 pounds. I think the 58 pounds is going to help it atomize fuel. You know, to number 6 and number 1, because it just keep it suspended. It gives it like a finer particles.
Mist. Yeah. No, I totally understand that. We used to be the trick when you were racing 5-liter Fords. Okay, was, you know, you do your injector calibrations and say, okay, you need a 24 or 30 pounder or whatever. And like when you run the GT40 intake manifold or a Cobra intake manifold, cylinders number 1 and 6, I think is right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 and 8. 1 and 8 used to run lean. So you'd run a 30 pound per hour injector in those, and you'd run a 24 in all the other ones.
Yeah.
And then you would jack, and what you wanted was, let's say you made 340 horsepower. Well, that's the max limit for like a 24 pound per hour injector. It's where it starts to run out of injector. So what you would do is you would increase the fuel pressure to some stupid number, right? And like say a Ford normally runs without any vacuum line on it, it would be like 43 pounds. So you'd run it up at like 56 pounds, 58 pounds. And it would have essentially your number 1 and 8 cylinder would be, because they're a little bit lean, they seem to get more air. Those would be a little dark because you're running 30 pound per hour injectors in those individual cylinders.
Yeah.
But the other 6 would be like a nice brown color. And you're like, okay, perfect. That's exactly what I needed. And then you would play with the EFI from there to get the mass air meter to not freak out over the 2 other injectors in 1 and 8, as it'd always be trying to trim fuel and then add fuel in as it reads the, you know, like the other side of the other bank of the engine or something.
Yeah.
But
hey, we got our first tech question.
Oh, where's it at?
Patrick, mostly old parts and rust.
I don't see it. Okay, is it here?
Yep, there it is.
Okay. All right. Well, Patrick asks, okay, here's the tech question. Any cylinder head, TA heads, or 360
Dash
ones?
Yep.
Okay. Just remember that the TA heads, DS, have difficulties in getting parts. What is DS? Maybe does. Maybe does. Maybe it's just a typo. Does have difficulty in getting parts. So he's trying to determine which cylinder head to buy based on what you have available.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing: is that I personally have the Indy 360-1s. The only problem with 360-1s, there's actually a few. One, the first one is that the exhaust port, at least at the time when I bought mine, is a taller. It's a higher port, and they run a W2, and I believe they have W5 bolt patterns on those. And so when you buy exhausts are made for W2, it's got a higher port in it, at least on mine. So nothing really seemed to fit. I had to make it fit. Second problem is that they take their own personal like intake manifold. So it's its own animal as far as an intake manifold goes. And at the time when I got mine, they only had the one, which is the single plane intake manifold. And then as far as rocker arms, there was only the T&Ds at the time. So if that's okay for you, then the 360-1s will work. But they're kind of an overkill head unless you have a really good block, and that's the reason why I've shown like just eaten through into cylinder blocks, is because my heads will outflow what that block can make, and that's the reason why I keep breaking them. They make more power than the block can handle. So, that it comes down to one of those two. And if I believe yours is turbocharged. I mean, I honestly would just find a place that has like a really good ported Magnum head. Like, look at Hughes. I think they have like a ported Magnum head that flows like some ungodly 320 CFM, which is about what the 360-1s actually flow, because they're a little bloated on their numbers. But you're going to cram all that air into it.
Yeah, his cylinder head at that point with a turbo really doesn't mean that much of a thing, right? Because you're forcing all the air in instead of drawing it.
Yeah, it will help with back pressure, essentially, but you won't need as much camshaft. I would just find a place that has a really good Magnum head at that point, and just
do they get an aluminum Magnum style head?
Yeah, exactly, and just one that ports it out, so that way you get the efficiency on the exhaust side, because the Magnum head will outflow that 360-1 on the exhaust side, because mine don't flow very good on the exhaust as it is. That's why I have to have a really big split. I think the cam in it right now is 270, 285 or something like that on a 108 LSA or something like that. It's ridiculous. So that's what I would do.
I can attest that the Blue Dart does run like a freaking scalded dog. It does run good. And it was surprising. I mean, well, I think when I first met you, that thing was running like, we were at Verona. I think it was running like 670. You were doing a match race like 670, right?
660,
and I'm like,
670s, yeah.
And I said, man, this thing's running pretty good. And you're like, yeah, it runs great because I got a throttle stop on it and I had to slow it down. Like, what? You're slowing it down to a 660, 670? Why? And then you were like, well, because I'm trying to run this NHRA Heritage Series, I think is what they call it, right?
The 1060 index. So I had a 660 is what you want to run at Verona, which would be about a 1060-ish at when you went to, like, say, Famoso. So, yeah.
Fontana or something.
Fontana. Yeah.
Yeah, that place is gone. Them guys treated me so poorly that time. That's where the whole AHRA started, was literally the night that I drove up there. I got off of work. I requested, getting time off the work in the military is not that simple, right?
Yeah.
I was an E8. I pretty much called the shots. I'm the senior guy in my office, and I still had to request time off 2 weeks in advance. And I got out of there like at 2:00. I got home, hooked up the trailer, hauled it to Fontana. Well, I had to drive through all that ridiculous traffic from San Diego to Los Angeles, right?
Especially on the 215 split.
Oh,
right there. It's ridiculous.
God, man. And it took me, I think, 4 hours to get up there. Some ridiculous number, 4 hours. And it was moving most of the time.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going real fast. And when I got up there, I think it was like 7:30. No, I'm sorry. It was 8:00. And my son had just went down, and they're like, yeah, sorry, you can't come in. I'm like, what do you mean I can't come in? I was trying to get here early, because if I leave at 3 a.m. to get up there the next day, it still gets me there with that crazy traffic at like 8:00. And then the time runs start at 8:00. So there's no way I could be here to even get my first time run. And they're like, yeah, well, you can't come in, you can't come in until tomorrow morning. And I'm like, oh, all right. Well, that sucks. So no big deal. I'll just hang out. Well, then as I pulled out, the guy behind me, they let him right in. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? Right? Like,
yeah.
How is there specialty people that can go in, but I can't? Well, then I realized that was a dude that was running in my class, right? The super gas class. And so I go ask the guy, I say, hey, man, how did that guy get in? Oh, well, we got certain people we allow in and certain people we don't. And I'm like, I started thinking, wait, I'm the only guy from the entire super gas group sitting outside. Everybody else is in there, right? Yeah. You can see all the trailers and everything. And it's like, you know what? Last time I was here, those guys were bitching that I was running, that I didn't have any electronics, and they were freaking livid, man. They were trying to rule book me and get me out of the series. And then I realized what was going on. They weren't going to let me in. They were going to let me miss the first time run. They were going to run me through tech for 3.5 hours again. And then I was going to have one time run to try to run a 990 index class with no throttle stop, no delay box, no computers, no nothing. And it just wasn't worth it. And that's where I gave up on it. So, all right. Dave Norman says your EFI Slant sounds real good, Shane. Looks to be better system compared to the Sniper.
I don't know. This one just has a standalone computer. I wanted something that had a computer that was not on the throttle body, that wouldn't be subjected to the underhood temperature heat. Now, this one is under the hood, essentially, what this computer is. But I wanted something that was separate because eventually, I'm going to go to many different types of fuel injection. This is just a non-tunable one. This is the one that just learns on its own. I'm going to go to a tuned one, and then I'm going to go to the sequential after that. So this is just step number one. So, but thank you.
So Craig Chitto is saying everyone on Long Island is selling off their project cars. The end is near. I haven't heard anything about this. Do you know anything about this where you can't have a project car in New York area? I mean, I imagine every time bad information comes out, like for the automotive community, it always comes out of like 3 major places, right?
Yeah.
New York, Los Angeles, Los Angeles area or Southern California, and then Chicago, right?
Chicago.
That's the main 3 places that I know of that where all the bad info comes out, where it's like, hey, you're gonna have an electric car or you can't breathe, Yeah. But
my biggest thing about I just want to elaborate on something real quick is that when I was living in San Diego before I left, we had a neighbor, and I remember one time I was working in the front yard on my green car, and she was walking by with her dog, and she goes, I can't wait until you guys can stop, having to work on your cars in the driveway there, because they had passed that law in California where you couldn't do any more work on your cars. That's what the law they were trying to pass, and I guess it did get passed. So technically, if you are spotted working on your car in your driveway or whatever, they can get you a ticket for that now.
Huh. So, well, they're gonna have to drive awful long ways to give me a ticket. Yeah, I'm not putting up with any of that crap. I don't know I'm sure the auto hobby shops on the base are probably closed down now. If that's the case, I don't know.
Yeah.
But 2Hex Jeff is asking, Shane, what's your thoughts on methanol injection on a stroker big block tunnel ram and 11-to-1 compression? Pros, cons?
Is it just methanol injection only, or is this going to be methanol injection to cool it down? I'm assuming it's going to just be methanol injection. I'm all about methanol injection. It works awesome. And it's not that super hard to tune, believe it or not, because you can use a lot and it still works. Here's the only problem with it is that it's expensive and it's hard to drive it on the street. I usually use methanol injection for like when you're trying to cool something down that's like either blown or supercharged or turbocharged or whatnot.
His is naturally aspirated.
Oh, this is naturally aspirated. Yeah,
I think so. I think this is the one in the Larry T. Bird. The
this is
Bird of Prey, right? And what I'm assuming is he's trying to pull some of that detonation out. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, if that's the case, then yeah. I mean, methanol. But here's the problem: is getting methanol is going to be a pain in the butt. I mean, I don't know where he lives or how easy it is, but try E85.
Oh, no. If he's going to do methanol injection, there's a cheap way to do this. See, all right, in 1962, with the invention of the Y-body platform that I'm just so happened to be working on my Buick Special, its brethren is the F85 Oldsmobile. Well, if you got the hot version of the F85, it was called the Jetfire, right?
Yeah.
And the Jetfire came with that same 215 Buick with an aluminum set of Oldsmobile heads. They were a wedge head design, but it also came with a turbocharger, and you could get a turbocharged, side draft carbureted 215 that came with what essentially became boost juice, right? It had water methanol injection from the factory.
Yeah.
And that stuff you used to have to buy in like essentially a can from General Motors, and you go there and get your can of boost juice and you put it in there. And then someone realized that windshield washer fluid is made with water and methanol, right?
Yeah. Well, I get that, but that's what I was asking is if he's going to run methanol as the primary fuel, or is he just going to run meth injection like to cool down some of the detonation? Because that's what I was getting at, is that you could use the washer fluid.
Yeah, I think that's the ticket. You got to use the blue stuff though, like the anti-bug stuff isn't going to work. It's got to be the original blue
stuff.
crap.
Yeah. That stuff's got the antifreeze in it, and it doesn't burn for shit, you know.
Yeah. Let's see. So Danny Boy said, Dallas drinking Fosters. Oh, no self-respecting Australian or New Zealander drinks Fosters. It's like Americans in Budweiser, right? Like no one really drinks Budweiser, but everyone overseas believes that we do. And so they sell it, and I'm certain that everybody feels the same way as I do when I drink a Foster's. Like, ugh. There's so many other better beers in Down Under. I used to be a Tooheys man. I liked my Tooheys extra dry, but there is like other things like 4X and VB and all that stuff. But no, I have this is a Dr. Pepper zero sugar, so I haven't done a cold one in a while. I'm trying to slow down on them just because I'm only allowed one per day. I got the beatus pretty bad. So Fred74 says he loves that intro. I know. Well, I actually have another intro for our channel coming today, and I got Shane to essentially proof it today. So he thinks it's a go. We got to continue putting some more stuff in there and make it worthwhile. But you do like it, right?
I do. It's perfect because there's a lot of pictures on there that I'm laughing at, because it's just, I remember making those and we're like, oh, this is so stupid, and there it is. There's that picture.
All right. Well, Val 0360 Jimmy says one of my Indy 361s were porous when I received them years ago. My engine builder got it repaired. Not sure if they're having the same issues these days.
Yeah, that was a problem with mine too, is that when I first got them, I couldn't run them for almost 3 years. I had so many issues with them for this exact same type of deal. After sending them back 4 or 5 times, but this was all in the early mid 2000s when they first came out, because I had the very first generation of them. So I don't know what they've done since then or whatnot, but I'm assuming that they had them fixed, because I've heard a lot of people running them, and a lot of people ask me questions about them, because I've got some OG ones, but they would leak. Basically, they would leak, and the water comes out right into the valley, like underneath the intake, right
Ooh.
Between where the push rods go.
The worst place for it to leak.
Exactly, right up on the top, and it's just, it was a pain in the neck.
Raining down on the crank and smoking bearings all the way down.
Yep. So yeah, I had the very first engine ran basically on the dyno. We made 6 pulls on it, and I started seeing steam. Luckily, we shut it off in time, and it was the water was coming in. There's little plugs in there that have to be put in there, but when they're tightened up, the porous on them would send cracks through them. So eventually, I had all those all welded up again, and then had it redecked. So.
Well, Craig Chitto elaborated on his Death to All Automobiles post there from the New York area. We have great laws. Anything made before OBD2 is exempt. HD pickups are exempt. That's because you can't. The emissions requirement for heavy-duty pickups for like essentially F250 or 2500 and up used to be considerably different compared to like a regular car. But anything made before OBD2, that would essentially mean what, 1994 and before, 6 and before?
96 is when it was mandatory. There's a few companies in 94 that started, but basically 96 is what they're saying.
The thing that really cheeses me off about this old car thing, where you go after the old cars because they're the polluters. Well, if you look at the old cars, there's probably like 1% of old cars on the road, right?
Yeah.
Like 1%. And the other 99% is the people that run out and buy new stuff every week. Hot rodding used to be, and it still is, in my opinion, the very first and foremost form of recycling, right? Because it was upcycling something. You were taking something that was absolute garbage, and it was a throwaway in everybody else's mind, and you were using it for some other purpose and enjoying it again, instead of taking something that had taken, I don't know, a bazillion zillijoules of electricity to make, and
that will never save enough to replenish what it took to be made.
Right. You know? And then kicking it to the curb and going buy another one that takes even more electricity to be made.
Yeah.
I never understood how someone did not see that until it dawned on me. No one cares about that shit. They actually just care about selling cars or making you buy something that you don't necessarily need. They want to milk you for everything they can get. And that's one of the things that they're always going to hound on is the old car. Well, they're going to get my old cars, but it's going to come with a couple loads of buckshot if they want to come take them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm ready for that too. So
yeah.
And, you know, when I was actually in college, I was in a class and we were talking about this exact thing. And I was driving an old car and they were, you know, people were ridiculing me for it. And I told them it's the best form of recycling because it's my forever car. It may not get 50 miles to the gallon, but it gets about 25. And it never has to be reproduced because it's already here. The car that you buy every 10 years has to be replaced. It will never save enough fuel to replace itself by the time you replace it with the next one.
And that's what I like about the old cars is like they lasted so long, right? Yeah. Compared to the new ones. Like the new ones, the average life is like 6 years. Okay. Yeah. Well, okay, think about it like this. How many 1990 Hondas do you see on the road? None. Zero.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
How many 1950 Chevrolets do you see on the road?
A lot.
There's still quite a few, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, they weren't the best on fuel, but the consumption considered, you know, like compared to the amount of energy that it took and the lifespan of the vehicle, God, that thing it has to be the best thing that you could possibly have. It's something old and fairly reliable, especially if it's like a inline six car, right? Inline six, 3 on the tree. It's going to get, and this may sound ridiculous, but like my 63 Buick, the fuel economy on it was 29 miles to the gallon with a 215 V8. And in town was 20, right? Mm-hmm. Highway was 29, and back then cars they didn't have. I mean, interstates were fairly new, and average speeds on most of those vehicles was like 55 or 60 miles an hour.
Exactly.
Right. Yep. Today's speed limits 70 plus. You can't run one of them older cars like that without having an overdrive. But the fuel economy stands for itself. You know, it's. When they did the Ford flatheads with the overdrive transmission, they were in the 30s mile per gallon wise, and those things were produced in the 40s. And we haven't really progressed past that. But so 2Hex Jeff is saying he's got methanol, or he wants to know methanol injection and fuel octane is 100 octane.
Meth injection on top of the fuel? I mean, yeah, it can't hurt, but I mean, he's 11-1 right now as far as the cam and camshaft, and he's got aluminum heads on it. He really doesn't need 100 octane, really. I mean, it's
I'm looking at it like this. It's got 11-1 compression and aluminum heads, so that's like pretty much like having 10-1 compression.
Yeah, it's like 10. Yeah, because you can run basically on the street all day long 10.5-1 with aluminum if you have the right camshaft. If you put the right cam in this thing, you shouldn't have any issue at all. It shouldn't detonate at all or have any type of problems.
Well, there's a lot of other factors too. Camshaft is one. The other one is poorly designed timing curve, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yes.
And then here's another one that nobody ever thinks about. Lean condition on the carburetor will cause detonation something fierce. And if you don't have the carburetor dialed in correctly, it can cause detonation pretty easy. The other things that I've noticed are too hot of a thermostat. Right. So if you got like a 160 in there, you're probably okay. I would say that's probably not the issue. The other one is too hot of a plug. No one thinks about that either.
Yeah. I always start at the coldest plug and just keep going up until I stop fouling plugs.
Yep.
That's about where I leave.
Yep. And that's the easiest way to do because you keep going up until you start getting detonation, then you go back down one. And that's just if you leave the whole entire combination alone and just play with plugs. But each one of those, when you have a new build, is something that you have to take into account because you don't know unless you're very familiar with the engine family, what it's going to do.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, a lot of the stuff you just said exactly, but that comes with like building it and driving it for a while.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Just put some time on it. But 11-to-1, and if you send me your camshaft, I'll basically calculate out kind of what you're going to be seeing as far as a running rate, compression. Pretty simple. Just tell me what the camshaft is, and then that way we can make a camshaft for you that will run a lot better. It's not going to be one with the tight LSA. It's going to be definitely a wider LSA to kind of bleed off some of that, so you can have a bunch of late openings and stuff like that. But it'll definitely help out.
Yeah, 10-to-1 in that thing shouldn't even be detonating, or it's 11-to-1. But I realize with aluminum heads, it has 10-to-1 compression because it can dissipate heat so quickly. Colin Tebow's asking, Dallas, is Roadkill Customs helping channels out this year? Okay, so John Wilburn and I last Friday had announced the No Name Nationals 2023. And in 2022 No Name Nationals was Roadkill Customs was one of the sponsors for the event. I don't know if they're going to sponsor this year. We haven't actually followed up on anything past just the dates, the location, all that. I know that they were eager to do it. Buzz was eager to do it. I don't know if they're going to be helping channels. I don't know we haven't worked any of those details out. So all of that still needs to be, I guess, chased to ground and then fine tuned to, but right now it's just, we gave you the location and the dates. That's all we got so far. We haven't done anything with sponsors yet this year. I'm sure Buzz will be back. I don't know if Buzz is going to have the same involvement as he did last year, because he was literally like a frenzied working crazy man, trying to keep up with all the lives and everything like that. So I don't know if he's going to do the same thing he did last year, but I'm certain he probably would. I haven't asked him. So,
yeah.
All right. So Bill McKyska, is it worth while to have water methanol injection on a small block that's just going to see everyday use in a work truck? No.
No.
I'll tell you where that will help out, though.
Climbing hills.
Towing would be like,
climbing hills, yes.
Yeah, because you're just getting to a hill. Oh crap, it's starting to spark knock. Throwing in a little water methanol, it's not going to hurt it. It actually runs more efficiently that way.
That's actually where I started using it the very first time was climbing. Anytime I went anywhere when I was younger, just getting out of San Diego was the worst.
It's like in a bowl.
Yeah, exactly. Because you got to go to 4,000 feet 3 times, and then you go below sea level right after that. Just to get out of San Diego. Any direction you go, you got to go. High. So that was the hardest thing. Is that. So I started messing with water injection right off the bat, because just getting out of the town where I was living in Poway, we had to go up a grade. Literally come out of that, and you start a grade instantly. Then you come down to Highway 8, and then basically it's 25 miles of uphill all the way. Yeah. So,
and it's not messing around, because when you climb that sucker, the good thing about going out is generally you got the wind to your back, going out of San Diego down 8 towards Phoenix, right? But the coming home is the killer part, because you'll press that hill, and then it's like 900-mile-an-hour wind right in your face, right?
It stops you. Literally, you're going up through the canyon, and then you make that right-hand turn where you open up into that upper valley right up there, right where the curve's at, right where you can see the desert tower, and that wind hits you. It's about 70 or 80 miles an hour, and it just stops you. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that.
Craig Chitto says there's a jet fire for sale in Long Island, $700, no engine trans, lots of rot. I would, based on what I see with mine, if you got lots of rot, pass on that sucker. You just can't. They don't make floor pans for them. They don't make quarter panels for them. They don't make any replacement parts for them unless you have a parts car already. I'd pass on that sucker.
Yeah.
All right. So Danny Boyd says farmers recycled and hot rodders did the same, but made it look good. Yeah, I think I think it's just a money grab.
Yeah, that's all it is. Oh,
let's see. What's that?
Oh no, I was just talking out loud to another question here. It's just a little farther down. So,
is it this one here?
One below.
One below it. Okay. Max Wedge Dick Dastardly says, you guys think 20,000 steel head gaskets with 11-to-1 will be okay? and not blow. Yeah, I don't think that'd be a problem.
I don't think it'd be a problem, but nowadays we have kinetic gaskets and you can still get them in 21, 25,000s. I would personally use a kinetic gasket instead of just a steel head gasket, like a single one. That's just my opinion. I've never had a problem with them. The kinetics or any type of multi-layer steel head gasket, they work awesome. I say go for it.
Yeah, I think those 20,000 steel head gaskets. The Buicks came factory with, and a lot of Mopars did too, with a steel shim head gasket that was 20,000s.
Yeah.
And a lot of them engines came with 10.5, 11-to-1 compression, no problem. The trick used to be if you got the new gaskets, which is like, I don't know if they even make them anymore. I haven't used them in a while. The only thing I've ever used them on is that 300 Buick. But it used to be take that steel shim head gasket and copper coat that sucker and then put it on, and it will not leak.
Ever.
Now, they'd start to get iffy up around 12, 13-to-1. They do they do come apart, and it will melt the fire ring right out of them.
Yes.
But they're not too shabby. The multi-layered steel, the MLS gaskets is the ticket. Cool. I don't like to point people towards the Cometic stuff because Cometic is Chinesium.
Well, it's a name now. It's kind of like, what do you want to drink? I'll take a Coke. Yes, well, I agree with you. So yes, a multi-layer steel gasket.
So 2 Hacks Jeff says, I don't have detonation. Carbs are dialed in. Car runs at 180 degrees. Shane, I'll send you the cam card. Okay, well then, it's not detonating then. I don't understand why you would run methanol injection.
Yeah, well, when he sends this to me, I'll take a look at it, and then we'll have that topic of conversation next week. Then
Rick Salmon says, when it comes to politics, gun control, religion, the EV movement, etc., sanity has replaced reason. Yeah, that seems to be the way it's going these days. Let's see. Mopars, Mustang, and minivans. I hate pestering you, Professor P. Any news on them RPM performance heads?
No.
Let's see.
I don't have an answer for you yet. I'm as soon as I get an answer, I will text you. I will text you on the phone.
So, Fab Race Mod Repeat says, Dallas, parts car or mad fab skills? Like growing up in the Midwest, I was originally from Illinois in the middle of the Rust Belt. And I mean, I never had seen clean sheet metal till I joined the Navy and went to San Diego, and it was like, what in the world? But growing up screwing with junk from the Midwest, where it was like literally rust falling in your face as you're just looking at stuff under the car. The rust used to have a rule of thumb. The rust that you see on the outside, you can automatically assume that you have just as much rust, if not more, behind the paint. Right? It used to be that was the rule of thumb. So it was always twice as big as what you see as a minimum. And so, I mean, that was kind of the way we used to gauge them. And Mopars were bad. I don't know what they were doing with paint or plating on the bodies, but God, that Midwest salt just used to like. I imagine if the salt truck drove by, the car would rust. That's how
they have that little, up in those pockets. They have those little pockets and stuff. Just mud stays up in there, like in my car. Yeah. I have it stuffed, and rubber will get in there, and you have to physically pull it out.
I bet it has to do with it being a unibody, because a lot of the Mopars were unibodies, right? And everything else kind of was different.
Yeah, it's all the pockets and all the little grooves that they have to reinforcement. And that's how it is. And then they use, it's just terrible.
Well, Tesla Speed Shop says water injection was a big thing in the 1970s. My uncle had it on a 69 Goat. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer that water methanol injection works. I just don't know if it's actually practical in a naturally aspirated combination, because it will technically make more power. But think about it. When you run water does not burn. Right, so it's taking up volume in the engine or in the combustion chamber. It's taking up volume in the head. It can't make more power, with the exception of quenching detonation. and allow you to make the power that you could have if you just played with the right camshaft combination and all that stuff. Let's see. Do you see any other tech questions?
I'm kind of just going through.
Let's see here. I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah, I'm at the bottom, so I don't know where you're at on this one.
Oh, I'm down at the bottom. All right, so we don't have any tech questions at the moment. Anything new planned for the Slant 6 Dart?
Yes. In fact, like I was saying before, maybe I didn't say this earlier, but I'm going to go. I built and put this thing together so that way I could go back to carburetor if I wanted to. And remember when I was talking to you the day on that Saturday? I think it was last Saturday. I was like, dude, this thing is just amazingly awesome compared to what I'm used to. I literally am going to drop the tank and I'm going to put a fuel pump in the tank so I can get rid of that one that's in the fender. I'm not saying it doesn't work. It's fine. It's just that this is something that I want to do. I just didn't, and stay with it. So, because it runs so well,
right.
I don't think you have to tune the car for one or the other. Like I was telling you, it's either mileage or it's either power. This does them both. So I'm still on the fence if it's faster or not, but it's definitely more responsive. So, and since
throttle response generally equates to quicker 60 foot.
Yeah, and it definitely will. And that was the hardest thing about racing people is that I had to kind of roll into it, because of the 276 gear in the back. But where it's at now, I can basically just put flat to the floor and it just takes care of itself.
Huh. Well, I can't wait to see what kind of mileage returns it gives you, because I think there isn't a lot to be gained on mileage, but drivability and like cold startup, there's going to be a hell of a lot to gain, right?
Well, I was trying to calculate how much I was losing in fuel. And what I mean by that is when I would drive somewhere during the summertime and then I would park it, I would have to turn it over X amount for it to refill the bowls. So even though I was getting 24.
Oh, you mean vaporizing out of the bowl?
Yeah, exactly. It was vaporizing. So and the only reason why I did so good at drag week is that we never really turned it off. It only shut off a couple times during the whole day. It wasn't like start and stop and around town doing stuff. So I wasn't boiling out all that fuel in the carburetor. That's why I got such excellent mileage. And I think that's the reason why it's going to do much better is because it's not going to boil out any of that fuel.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting to know, what really how you should gauge it is how much fuel that you put in it and how much run time there is. So you got idling run time or in-town run time versus highway run time. And then, you'd have to do the same thing with carburetor and then your EFI and see what the difference really is. Because I think what you're going to find is in town, your fuel mileage is going to be considerably better just because you're, on and off the throttle so much. And that's where that thing really shines. You might end up with say, instead of 22 in town, you might end up with a 24 or 25 in town. And that's if you look at it, dang, I mean, you're starting to get upwards of 10% better fuel economy in town. If you start throwing numbers like 3 miles to the gallon and you're only getting 25, that's 10%. That's more than 10%. It's actually 11 and a half.
It's actually really good. So so we're going to start doing that soon. I'm going to just drive it around town. Obviously whenever I do a big change, I just don't take it on a big trip, except for the one time when I put a new engine in it and I drove it all the way to Tucson on the very first warm up and changed the oil somewhere in Texas for the brake-in oil. So that's the only time I ever did that. But most of the time I like to drive them around a little bit and trust them. They have to earn my trust before I start taking them on road trips,
Oh yeah. I do the same thing. You do small drives. John Schroeder asks, doesn't water injection raise the compression?
Well, it's going to take up space. I mean, technically,
probably a minute amount.
It would, but the amount basically, it's going to expand. It's going to flash steam. It really is what's happening is with this. How it gets more power is that there's a few things going on. One, it's going to control detonation. Two, is that when you first put it in there, it's going to steam, and a steam train that's how it works. The steam goes in there and it flash steams, and it just expands rapidly. And that's kind of what we're doing here. Raising compression, it's going to be so minute. I mean, at least from what I've seen, it would just be So we could calculate it, I guess, but
because water doesn't compress, and it technically this volume that it's taking up would increase the compression, because you might get, like, say, it probably wouldn't even be 1 cc worth of volume in the cylinder, right?
No.
But
The
it
steam
would be
do. Yeah.
right. And I think what really happens with water methanol injection. So methanol burns cold, if you didn't know that. Methanol, actually, you could pour it on your hand, light it on fire, and it would not burn you until it starts running out of methanol and it starts burning your skin. That's where methanol shines, is it actually burns cold. When it burns cold, it pulls the heat out of the cylinder, which is what causes detonation. But when you have the water in there, the water acts as like a heat transference, right? It allows it to, the heat in the air, to transfer to the cylinder head, or transfer to the cylinder wall or the top of the piston, and not so much in the air, because in the air, when the air gets hot, just like any other engine that, like, say a diesel runs on. Have you ever seen the videos where the guy puts like a piece of cotton inside of a diesel engine and it burns?
Yeah.
Because the compression's so high. The same thing happens in a gasoline engine. The compression is nowhere near as high, but with fuel and RPM and, let's say, heat, it can flash off, and that's what essentially is your detonation. But no, it does not raise the compression. If it does, it's just minutia that's probably not even calculable. It probably is based on the volume and RPM of the engine, and you need to know a lot of variables in there. But God, Shane's probably working the math problem right now in his head.
Actually, I kind of am working on it right now.
But it would be a small, minute amount, yes, because water is not compressible. Okay, let's see. I mean, homemade fuel injection. I must have missed something here.
Yeah, I missed something too. I think he's talking about.
Well, he can email you. I mean, he's a regular on here, and you guys got a pretty good rapport going on. Like, you're like dart buddies and fist bump everywhere you see him. I mean, you gave him a motor, didn't you?
Yeah, I gave him a Magnum, a short block.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so it's a 360 Magnum short block. He wanted a 318. I was like, well, there's a 360 there. Take that if you want. I don't care. Take either one. Pick one. Whatever you want.
So, Kurt Tank. I don't know if you can read this.
Oh, Remflex. That's exactly what I use.
Is the best exhaust manifold gasket you're ever going to find.
Ever.
It is made entirely out of graphite, and they're pricey, and you're never going to have to replace them.
Yep. And in fact, every single Slant 6 that I build gets one of those, because you never have a problem with the intake or the exhaust manifold ever. They work.
Dr. Art's wanting to know, do you want to face the Slant 6 against his turbocharged Ranger?
Oh, turbocharged Ranger?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that.
Why not? I mean, if it's a complete blowout, then I mean, he beat a Slant 6. You know what I mean? So sure, why not? If he's anyone who's challenging me, anything can happen, right? It's a drag race. So, sure. I mean, my car runs. Would I get a 10.5 in the 8th was my best time. So if you're light years faster than that, there's no point in racing. But if it's close, sure, I'll run you. How about this? We do it on a Pro Tree.
Well, so Craig Chitto's saying that water methanol is like EGR, only cleaner. It steam cleans the combustion chamber. That used to be a normal, commonplace thing, is when you went and got, like, a tune-up. Okay, if you were doing the full-blown tune-up before you put new plugs and all that stuff, the rule of thumb used to be run like it wasn't even a quart, but what you would do is get a Type F transmission fluid, because it has a lot of detergents in it, and you pour it down the carburetor and loose up all that carbon in the chamber, on the valves, in the runners, and then you get the engine nice and hot, and you just force that transmission fluid through there, right? And once it was done with that, you let it run for a while and idle and let it work itself free. Right? Let the carbon work free.
Mhm.
And then you would pour water down the carburetor while holding it open. And the flash steaming in there used to knock all that carbon loose, and it would literally spit, I don't know,
Chunks.
buckets of carbon out the tailpipe.
Yeah.
And then you put new plugs in it and all that stuff. You readjust your carburetor and get everything tuned in. But
Then
that
you
was,
do your tune-up. Yeah.
yeah, that used to be a normal thing because, and here's what's funny is like, I'm sure everybody in California is cringing when they hear you, doing that stuff. But in reality, that thing uses a lot less fuel when it's done, and the engine runs for a much longer time.
Yes. I used to use the Skirt Spy Parkway that used to go up on Poway. That's how I did. Is I would put it into the PCV valve, and I ran a gallon of DI, distilled water in the cab, and that had a little valve. And I would go up the hill and I would floor it, and I would open the valve until the car stopped accelerating, and I would just hold it floored and go up the hill. And it was 5 miles of uphill. It would suck down a gallon of that water, and then it would eat it all up. Turn the valve off when it got close to the top, got close to being done. And if you needed to do it a couple times, you did it a couple times. You coming down the hill, it would cool down. You do it again, and then you'd come back, tune it up, and it was like a brand new truck. So yeah, I did that quite a bit.
Well, let's see here. Irish Outlaw Girl. That's what my dad taught me, and it used to be the old school hot rodder or mechanic's trick. Colin Tebow saying, speaking of Type F, best thing to free rusted pistons in a block. And I'll tell you what else works really good is you take some of that Type F and you mix it with acetone, and it thins it out some, and that acetone will evaporate like really quickly, and it will get that Type F down in the grooves where you can't normally get it. It does work really well, but
yeah,
Type F always seemed to have more detergents in it. I always hated it because, like, I don't know if you were ever everybody here at one point was a young gearhead, but worked on junk stuff. That was my forte for like a long time, was just working on junk stuff. And if you lay under a car and you're like saying changing a transmission out, getting Dextron, Mercon in your eye is way different than getting Type F in your eye.
Because it burns less.
Oh my God. Is it painful?
Oh, I know. I knew exactly where you're going on that one.
Yeah. It is miserable. But what's going on there? Parties happening? Okay, Craig Chitto saying, can you put diesel or direct type gasoline injection in the manifold instead of the chamber?
Can you put diesel
or direct type gasoline injection in the manifold instead of the chamber? I don't see why that wouldn't work. Because like a regular fuel injected car, it's in the runner, right? I think it would be really no different, with the exception of it may pool in the intake manifold runner. The velocity is really high right there, but see, that thing is meant to go in the chamber when you're already. The way that works, the way the direct injection works is diesel. I don't think it would work.
No, right? It wouldn't work in diesel, absolutely, because it's got to be under high pressure, and that when you inject it in there, that's basically when it flames off. Is when it's under that pressure.
Right. The gasoline, I think it might work, but it would be very less efficient than just having port injected or direct injected. And the reason why I say that is, what's neat, a lot of people don't understand how direct injection is manipulative. Like, you can manipulate the crap out of that, right? Okay, and Ford started doing that in like the Power Stroke diesels, like the 6.4 Power Stroke diesels is where the first time I ever heard of it. The previous life of Power Stroke diesels, you had your 6.0, which would pretty much blow up and die, and then you had your 7.3. They would essentially spray in one atomization, direct injected into the chamber, and it would, as Shane was saying, would light off as soon as you sprayed it in.
Yeah.
But the 6.4 used to have 5 pulses, and it had a piezo electric injector that had essentially like a crystal oscillator inside there that would run that piston back and forth inside that injector at like some ridiculous frequency, right? And what they would do is they would put in essentially 5 pulses of fuel in there, and one was a pre-ignition, and it allowed it to run more efficient, quieter, make more power. And then so when they started doing gasoline direct injection, that's where they started doing the same thing. That's where the huge power gains came from.
Yeah.
Was that multi-injection cycle, I think is what it's called. Let's see, mostly old parts and rust. Another head question. I have a set of Edelbrock Magnum heads, and I have a set of China aluminum LA heads that I'm putting good valves in with hand porting by a pro and a really good valve job. Which one?
Magnum head all the way. And the reason, there's a few reasons. Aside from just the Magnum head being a little better as far as the design, they have a better rail for the valve cover. They have better options for rocker arms because you can run on a Magnum head. You can run a GM style rocker arm, so they're very inexpensive, and it's just a better quality of Edelbrock. They still pour. We still make our heads in America. They're actually made in San Jacinto. That's where the foundry's at. So I have personally seen the problem with some of the China aluminum and the way it comes across. If it was me and you have the options, I would run the Magnum heads for one, because they're Magnum. There's a lot more options and cheaper to keep them running faster, longer. Two, because of the Edelbrock quality over the China quality. Yeah, you can get hand porting, so on and so forth, but the Magnum's just going to have a better velocity inside the head, and that's really what you're looking for, because you're going to be turbocharged, so you don't care much about CFM. You're really just talking about port velocity, the square sectional area of the port, and how it's flowing in. That's where I would be. It's my question. Edelbrock's all the way.
Yeah, well, and I would have to agree. I mean, gosh, that Chinesium is so bad.
Yeah.
And people don't really understand it until you buy something and then you have to remachine it to make it work. It's just the quality is so poor. And I think a lot of it is just because there's no quality assurance that's going on with. That's where they're cutting the corners at, is like, these people are essentially working for free. Here, I notice I got a big glare on my head, but yeah, American stuff all the way. That's the way I would do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kurt Tank is saying, great show. Thank you very much. Hit the like and subscribe button. And we will do this every Wednesday. We're about to have the coolest intro ever made for Wednesday Night Tech Talk Live. So, all right. So I'm sorry. Valo 360 Jimmy says, Shane, do you have any 450 to 500 horsepower recipes for a 360 cube LA Mopar street strip motor? What cam and heads would you recommend?
I actually have a complete, as you were talking, I pulled up the whole recipe list. So I will start at the top. Basically a block 360. You could use a 360 regular, 360 Magnum. It won't make any difference. All these will be with the Magnum heads. Now this one just happens to be the Engine Quest heads. Where's my heads at? I had a part number here. They're just the Engine Quest Magnum heads, but basically it's a stock crank. I used just pistons 9.5 to 1 because it's a cast iron head. Keith Black ring set. These are recipes that are from like the 2000s, but they work awesome. At that time, it was cheaper to buy the Eagle SIR rod beams, but you could use your factory ones. It won't make any difference in this. The heads are Engine Quest stock replacement cast iron CH 318A in the 202 and the 160, and the NGK plugs are the FR5 plugs. The camshaft was a 232 duration at 50, 245 on the exhaust on a 108 lobe separation angle, and I was trying to keep the lift low, so it was 343. This is actually at the camshaft, and then 341 at the camshaft. Now, depending on what rocker arms you use, that will change your lift at the valve. For this combination, it was designed for a 1.6 rocker arm, and since they were Magnum heads, I went with a small block Chevrolet type of 1.6 rocker arm. Obviously, some guide plates. The intake is just a Performer air gap. Part number is 7577. It's a Holly Carb 650 double pumper. Part number is 0-4777C as in Charlie. This was basically, most of the ones in Southern California were running this. It was the front jet was a 69 jet, had a 4.5 power valve on it, and the rear had no power valve and a 75 jet. Seemed to work really good. That's basically my baseline. And then I had a 1-inch open spacer. The headers were basically a 1 5/8 to a 3-inch collector with a minimum of 18-inch extension on it. Beyond that, you could run whatever you wanted, but it had to have at least a minimum of 18 inches on there. Distributor, stock distributor with the light MSD springs. I would just recurve it. 38 total degrees. This was on 91 octane, and it was all in by 2,500 RPM. And the oil pump was basically a stock replacement. I didn't run any type of high volume or anything like that. I just did a lot of oil crossovers. There's little bit of block modifications I did. But if you email me at slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, I will send you this recipe. And I have another recipe. That one made 461 foot-pounds of torque at 4,500 and 454 horsepower at 6,000. And this is not just a one-time deal. This is a recipe I used to go to. And when I used to build engines for people, I built probably couple hundred of these for this setup, and then I have one that's the exact same setup that's an aluminum head, which is the Performer RPM, and that one made 461. Now all these made more power than that, but this is what I would almost use the word guarantee that it would make. So it was a really, really simple setup, and they were literally identical setups. The only difference is the heads and the compression. It was, instead of 9.5 to 1, I went to 10.5 to 1 on the aluminum, because it would actually lose power on the aluminum if you kept them at 9.5 to 1, because there was not enough thermal efficiency in the head to keep the heat up to make it efficient. So, but yeah, those, I know that was kind of long-winded, and I apologize, but yes, I do have really good recipes for those. So if you want them, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, I'll send it to you, and it even comes with all the part numbers and all the settings and everything you need to do. And you can make it really easily powerful with that. And those are great engines. I drove one of those things forever, and I even blasted a 250 shot to those things, and they still survived.
Well, 450 horse, or you said 461 horse, and then 450 foot-pounds of torque. Something like that. That's a awesome street combo, man.
Yeah, that's why I kept records of these. I have records of every engine that I've ever built, and what it made on the dyno. Remember when I had that chassis dyno shop I was telling you about in San Diego? I dynoed most of these things at the wheel. So then, and a lot of these guys at the time I was running, they were having stick shifts, so it was really easy to calculate the loss, the power loss through them. So I was doing them at 20%. So, these things are good for, almost 400 at the wheels, which is really, that's pretty amazing type of stuff.
Oh, that's an instant, low 12-second machine, depending on what you got it in. I mean, you can be into high 11s easy, or mid 11s.
Yeah, one of the guys he took one. It was basically the cast iron version. He put it in a 69 Dodge Dart. He had a 904 with the low ratio first and second, and a 2500 stall in it, and he was running mid 11s in the car.
That's sweet. That's a sweet combo. So Testa's Speed Shop says Manifier had a kit back in the 60s that tapped injector lines into the runners. It ran 4 2Gs and had solenoid to inject the fuel. What's a 2G? I don't know what that is. Is that a 2-barrel? Because I'm thinking like GM has the 2GC, I think, which is their early 2-barrel. I don't know what a 4Gs. But that's an interesting concept. The having the direct injector in the runner. I don't know. I imagine, there's got to be a reason why they didn't do it, because it was probably more efficient to have it in the head. But if you have, let's say you have a port injection, fuel injected intake manifold, and that's all you have. You don't have a head that supports direct injecting or nothing like that. I imagine putting that almost at because a regular fuel injector is almost completely perpendicular to the runner, right?
Yeah, it should hit the back of the valve as well.
Right. And the direct injection is more like you would want to have it almost at a very obscene angle. Because I think the volume of fuel coming out of there in such a short period of time is that thing's got like some microscopic pulse length.
Actually, no.
It's super short.
Somebody answered the question. It says,
Oh, really?
Dallas 2G Rochester carb, half of a 4G basic.
Oh, okay. So it is the GMGC, the 2GC.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right, that's what I was thinking. Well, that's pretty cool. I did not know that somebody made a kit for that.
Neither did I. That sounds awesome.
So, Fabrace Mod Repeat saying I primarily use Edelbrocks on my builds, except for cleavers and some of the FEs and 385 series, and that's because the Edelbrock head for the Fords is really not the ticket unless it's a Windsor. A cleaver head. God, I mean, who would you go to? I think there's about a list of like 20 people before you go to Edelbrock for a cleaver head, because those are virtually aluminum versions of 2-barrel or 4-barrel Cleveland. But CHI makes a freaking killer. I have AFDs with airflow dynamics. When it has a bad rep now because it got sold out to the Chinese, but man, the first 3-4 years of that cylinder head, it was freaking amazing.
Hey, while we're on this real quick, my computer just reset. Patrick, you were talking about the cylinder heads. This finally came up. I've been waiting for this the whole time, so sorry to cut you off there, Dallas.
No,
but
right.
If you go to Hughes Engines, and I talked to Dave Hughes there, he's a good friend of mine. They can take the small block Edelbrock Magnum head and basically what you have, and he can port them out. And as far as at 550 lift, they can get 324 CFM out of it. And then at 600, you can get to 327, 650 is 331, and 700 is 334. There's really no point going over 550 because you're not going to gain anything over that. So you could have a relatively mild camshaft in that thing, put the boost to it, and it's going to flow 327 and naturally aspirated. That's good for
that's 360 or 650 horse.
Easily, yeah. So I was going to say just over 650. If you put a big squeeze in there, you could probably get just under 700 out of it. So. And then you put the juice to it, a little bit of boost to it, you're going to make an easy 800-900 out of that without even trying. So, personally, in fact, if I were to go it again, I would definitely do a Magnum head that would have been ported instead of the 360-1s. That's just my opinion, because then I would have a head, I would have a block that could support the cylinder head.
So Valo 360 Jimmy says that he wasn't expecting such a detailed answer. He'll email you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah. I'm actually bringing some of my information from my other computer onto this computer. So when you guys ask questions, I'll actually have an answer. I'm trying to read ahead and get the answers up here so that way I can give you guys the best answer I can.
All right. Well, so I'm trying to read ahead and stay up on it, but I think this is the last post. So Colleen says she got her stickers yesterday, Dallas. Thanks. And if you guys didn't know that, like, you can buy AHRA's decals on eBay. We have our eBay store up and running. I have pretty much every T-shirt, hat, and decal that I could freaking muster and thrown it at eBay, so we can turn them into some no-name nationals funds. But if you guys have one. Did you?
I got one. Yes, and we actually are up and running now for our Slant Daily Garage T-shirt. So if you want to go out there, yes, exactly. You remember that picture? That was back when it was still Slant, when we had Slant Daily on the Facebook, and it was that outlaw Facebook.
Yeah, very adult oriented.
Very adult oriented. Yeah, but if you want to walk around and represent, the Slant Daily Garage, we got them. So,
I remember seeing the prototypes of that at the No Name Nationals. Like, you had like the first run of shirts hot off the press, like literally the day before.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. We boxed them up and put them out there, and I think we sold like 4 or 5 that day. But yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, but still, it was something for the kids to do. They were so excited. They're like, we sold the shirt.
Well, I got something that I've never even shown anybody, because I threw them out there at the No Name Nationals, and it was just like no one was really jumping on them. But I'll grab something and I'll show you.
Yeah. While he's doing that, I'll tell you something. Tony at Hot Rod Garage Dave Hughes, I used to talk to him quite a bit about cranks and rods when he would do a lot of his dyno testing on the big block Mopars. And I made him a few crankshaft shafts that actually survived. He talked to me about he was having problems with them, take out the center thrust bearing. And I was like, let me make you a crank. And we center counterweighted it and everything. And so he's a great guy. He actually called me up and admitted, you were right. And he hung up the phone, and then we became friends ever since.
Well, so Mr. Rodder's neighborhood decal. I don't even have those on eBay. I literally have these things that, like, I don't know. I had them made right before No Name Nationals, and I was just trading them one for one at No Name Nationals, and there wasn't a lot of people that even knew I had them. But every time you gave me a decal, I gave you some of those, and I don't know. I should have probably sold them.
John Wilburn, he posts this up here. Since he's caught up, he's basically going to say that he's going to talk with Andy Wood all things tunnel ram this Friday night on his channel, and I believe that comes on at Friday. Is it 8?
Yeah, 8 Central, I think, or no, 8 Eastern.
8 Eastern, yeah,
7 Central.
Yeah. So check it out. Andy Wood's a good guy. I actually met him without actually meeting him and knowing who he was when I was at the No Name Nationals. I went over there to go talk to Mopar Al and ended up meeting Andy Wood. Didn't even know who he was. So I was in the middle of racing people. So
Andy Wood is the dude. He is that guy.
Is he the guy that he's the one that talks with Vizard, right?
Right. He's actually Vizard's
apprentice.
His apprentice, his protege.
Protege, that's the word for it. Yeah. Protege. Got it.
But so Fab Race Mod Repeat was saying, speaking of 2G carbs, Edelbrock or Offenhauser, I believe, used to make a manifold that used 4 2Gs mounted sideways. It was like an expensive Weber setup. I've seen the 3 2-barrel setup. Of course, Pontiac had them and Chevrolet had them. But there was other ones that were available from like Offenhauser that were for like Buick Nailhead. Had 3 2-barrels, but I believe I've seen a Nailhead 2G setup where you had 4 2-barrels on there. I believe that's true. I think that was an Offenhauser deal.
Yeah, I saw one. The one time I saw one in real life, like actually in the wild, was on a Pontiac.
Oh, really?
It was set up, and Pontiacs kind of have that funky looking, kind of like Chrysler looking intake, anyways. You know how it's set up, and it had these, it had 4 of them on there, and it was like this cross flow looking thing. So it looked pretty cool.
Oh, let's see that Colin is trying to push the Scarlet the Red-Eyed Fox or Red-Eyed Cuda. Scarlet the Red-Eyed Cuda, is that right? Scarlet the Four-Eyed Cuda is still 21 subs. Let's get him to 500 so he's not standing outside. We got a long ways to go. There's literally like 9.5 months. Now, if you want to go over and sub to Scarlet the Four-Eyed Cuda, I'm not trying to push any of that stuff. That's normally what we do for lives on John Wilburn's channel, and that was the whole point, was to promote that stuff. But on the Wednesday night Tech Talk Live, I like to just keep it tech oriented. So I haven't been clicking on this much, but we don't have a lot going on, so I'll throw it up there. If you got a few minutes, go over there and sub to Scarlet the Four-Eyed Cuda. And see if we can get get him a couple subs, get him closer to that magic 500 number, so that he can race at the No Name Nationals. So that is coming up.
Subs, I'm only 19 away from the mythical 1,000.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Man, I should go sub to you now. No, I'm kidding. I've already subbed to you like a long time ago. But,
so that was crazy. In fact, what's funny about that is that my dad, I didn't even, just out of the blue, I saw that my dad's subscribed to me. That was pretty cool. I was like, that's awesome. So yeah.
Yeah, my dad has not subbed to me. That asshole. He died 7 years ago. So, but I guess he's not going to sub anytime soon. Mostly old parts and rust. Patrick is saying, here's what I'm thinking. Edelbrock Magnum heads, 1.7 rockers, 4050 bore, X block, Molnar crank, 385 or 358 stroke, and Molnar rods. Hydraulic roller cam with solid roller lifters and M1 F1 intake. Oh God, 450 horse NA. Should be more than that.
Yeah, it should be there. Here's the only thing I see wrong with your setup is that you're going to turbocharge this, right? That's the whole point of this thing. This 1.7 rocker arm, there's your problem. Is going to be opening the exhaust valve with this 1.7 rocker. If anything, put it on like say a 1.6 or even like a 1.5, and then just make up the difference with camshaft as far as lobe lift. And the whole reason for that is because that way when you get on blowdown on the exhaust, especially on a solid roller, when the blowdown happens, you're not going to put so much pressure on the rocker arm opening it up against cylinder pressure and spring pressure at high RPM. That's just my opinion.
Boost pressure. You're trying to force it open. I'll give you a quick example of that. The face of that valve, let's say it's 1.5 inch. Okay. If you got 20 pounds of boost, that means there's essentially 40 pounds of pressure sitting on that. Well, is that right? 40 pounds? No. Be 30 pounds of pressure sitting on that 1.5 inch face of that valve to begin with. And that doesn't include spring or anything. So it creates a lot of pressure against that valve. But if you think about it, when it necks down to that stem, the number even goes up even higher. Okay, because now it's, let's say 20 pounds per square inch. You only have 1/4 of an inch, right? Isn't that right? It would go up higher.
I'm calculating this out. And you said how many pounds of boost?
Just 20 pounds of boost is what I was looking at. But
yeah, 20 pounds of boost puts out about 30 pounds extra on that 35 pounds.
Yeah,
35.34 pounds of extra power on that pressure. But then you're opening against spring pressure. But that's not included the expanded, because that's just 20 pounds. But then on the exhaust side, you're opening against expanded cylinder pressure because it's already exploded.
Right.
Yeah. So it's hundreds more than what we're thinking, thousands more actually. So, and that's the reason why a lot of people, when they start running high boost, they start breaking rocker arms on the exhaust side first. But I like your setup. Hydraulic roller cam with solid roller lifters, you can do that. The only problem with those is that you're going to be running a tighter lash on that, because the masters of hydraulics are technically faster from off the seat to like say 20 or 50 thousandths. Then the solid roller is faster after that, but the hydraulics already got a little speed up on it. So you're going to be running a lot of velocity at the tip, pushing on that valve under, especially the exhaust. If anything, if this is going to be a boost setup, you can email me, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, and I will set you up with profiles so that way we can make this engine live if it's going to be under boost. Because once you get over that 14.5 or like 1 atmosphere of pressure, if you get up near that 20 pounds of boost mark, once you get over that, that's when things really start breaking, because you're really putting a lot of extra pressure on those valves and the rocker arms especially, and you can compensate that with camshaft.
So I guess the simple thing would be like if it had 180 pounds of cranking pressure and then you had 20 pounds of boost, now you're looking at 200 pounds, but it's across a fulcrum at a ratio, right? So if it was 1.7, this is what Shane and I had talked about before, was if it was 1.7, if you had 200 pounds on one side, say like you take it times 1.7, right? That's the pressure. That's just cranking pressure with 20 pounds of boost added in, right? And it's going to be some stupid number when you're talking running. It's going to be really, really high. And that's why it's so easy to break rocker arms, because people don't take into account the ratio. The ratio works backwards too, right? If you have a 1.7 ratio and it opens the valve essentially 1.7 times whatever lobe lift is, it's actually pushing back at 1.7 times the pressure. So if you're
more leverage to break things,
right? If your spring is let's say 200 pound spring, and then you got 200 pounds of cranking pressure plus essentially 20 pounds of boost, right? You're already looking at 400 pounds, but across that fulcrum is 400 pounds times 1.7 times 1.7. And now you're looking at 680 pounds, and that's not even it running. That's essentially just cranking compression with 20 pounds of boost added in.
Yeah,
so,
and that's not cylinder pressure. That we haven't talked cylinder pressure yet.
Right. So that's why I
pounds.
can see it breaking those rocker arms. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
There's only, I mean, that's just turning it over, trying to start it in your driveway with
Yeah.
20 pounds of boost added in. That's all you're
Mhm.
looking at. So,
Yeah.
let's see here. Okay, Michael Roberts says, how would a cross ram intake manifold work on a small block Chevrolet? Is that similar to putting tri-power on a small block Ford? No.
I just saw an Engine Masters on this, and it didn't fare very well. The cross ram, it looks cool, but it didn't. It did well down low, like because remember the Chrysler cross rams, it did well, but then once it got up into the middle and the upper end, it didn't really work like it was like a tunnel ram because it was actually just a little too long. They look great, and if you're going to drive them around, they work fine. But as far as I don't remember the exact number, so I'm not even going to say anything. But if you go back to Engine Masters and you check that out, they actually did this, and you can see the results for yourself. And if you're happy with that, then that's fine, because some people aren't looking for ultimate power.
Well, I think there's some wizardry to this. Okay, cross ram intake manifold, just like a tunnel ram, is something that when you bolt it on, just like you do like a single plane from a dual plane,
Yep.
The single plane to dual plane is probably going to gain you more because it's essentially right there and it's what it's designed for. But the cross ram is something that you have to take into account pulses within the intake manifold, which when you do that, that has a lot to do with exhaust. So like header diameter size, overlap on the camshaft, and camshaft is a huge one when it comes to this thing, because that's where you're trying to take advantage of the pulses at a certain RPM that this thing is going to, the velocity is supposed to be so much higher, but yet you're also going to get pulsing down through the intake manifold. And that has to be in sync with your camshaft
and your exhaust too.
And your exhaust system to really benefit from this. I think there's a lot of wizardry behind this. And this is where, I know John Wilburn's, we talk about the wizardry all the time, but this is something that literally, I think, engineering mind aside here, or actually to the forefront, you'd have to sit down and do a lot of math on this to figure out what would be the best combination for your cubic inch, and then what type of exhaust you're running. There's going to be like a whole entire, this would have to be a combination thing all the way around, right?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a lot of wave tuning involved in this too, and you're going to have like first, second, third, and fourth order wave tuning,
right?
And that's going to basically go to what, like you were just saying, there's going to be camshaft and pulse tuning from your exhaust is going to help, and you're trying to keep down the reversion coming into the intake manifold, especially on something like this. And with any cross ram that's going to be a cross ram, you're going to have some cylinders that are going to have hard time getting fuel to it. So
right.
You're going to have to do so much. Remember the old Chrysler books? Remember the old Chrysler Bibles? If you wanted to run, if you had a small block Mopar,
you want 11 seconds, this is what you did.
This is what you did. And then if you bought this manifold, here you turn to this page, you weld a tab in here, you grind this corner down, you do this, you do that, and that's how you get this thing to run, evenly all the way across. The only reason why I'm not a big fan of them is because there's going to be so much time involved in getting that manifold to run equal as far as the air-fuel ratio across the board. That's where you're going to lose all your time on it and just mucking with it. Personally, if that's something you want to do, I say have at it. It would be an awesome thing, and you could make a lot of content out of it, but you're probably going to get frustrated with it, especially if you take it to the track, because you're going to do a lot of work, and you might even go backwards, so buy a few intakes. Or just get a nice tunnel ram and call it a good.
Yeah, the tunnel. That's all this is a tunnel ram laid down, right?
Yeah,
in a horizontal plane, right?
But it's laid down where the carburetors are separated, and that's the problem because they're separated.
It's not allowing to use the plenum volume from each one of them.
Exactly, they can't take a bite from each one. That's right.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, we'll move on to the next one. There's another one right after this. Bicycle Guy 111 says, "Hey guys, picked up a 400 4-bolt main small block Chevy on a whim yesterday. The block looks to be in great shape, except one of the main saddles, a couple of caps are rusty. How rusty is too rusty?"
Pits. Pits are the problem, because if it's eating and putting holes into the metal, that's where you start having problems. But you can get caps for these things and just have it, honed in.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. A small block Chevrolet is like the most mass-produced thing on the. You can actually build an entire one, and not one part came out of Chevrolet, right?
Right.
And not anybody else can really see that. I mean, there's a few like Ford. You may be able to get away with some of the Cleveland stuff and the big block stuff, or maybe the Windsor stuff. But small block Chevrolet, you could buy billet main caps for that. That's exactly what I would do. And now if it's on the saddle on the block side, I
say just line hone it and go for it. Who cares?
That's exactly how I look at it. I run stuff that most people would throw in the trash. That happens a lot. Okay, think about it. Your crank doesn't ride on that saddle at all. It just
holds the bearing.
The bearing does. But what's going to happen is it's going to get oil back behind that bearing, and it's also itself going to have a hydraulic wedge behind it. That's really what keeps it in place. Now, it having a hydraulic wedge on both sides, it happens, and that's how they work. But having more oil back there means you have less surface for that bearing to grab. I don't know. I would definitely line hone it and see what he came out with.
Yeah,
if
line
anything,
hone it and put a bearing in there. Torque it down, and then measure the parting line, and then measure 45 degrees and 45 degrees, and just see what you got. Make sure that you have about 1,000ths difference. It's 1,000ths tighter, here than it is here and here. And if you have that, I say run it. I wouldn't worry.
Yeah, I would. I really. There is no such thing as too rusty unless it's something that can't be saved. I tell you what, the best way to do it is get in there with a wire wheel. A wire wheel won't take off any metal, really, right?
It just polishes it.
Right, it'll just polish it up, and then you'll see what you really have. Shane gave me a 350 Buick that sat in a Connex box for 20 years. I called it Project Boat Anchor. This thing looked like a bag of ass. It literally was rusted to death on number 2 and 4. No. I got it cleaned up, and all I did was literally wire wheel it, and I have an old green Scotch-Brite pad that I put on my my rotary tool, my air-powered rotary tool, and I go around with this old green Scotch-Brite. And the reason why I do the old green Scotch-Brite is it doesn't have a lot of butt left to it, right? So it don't take any material off. It really just cleans everything off. It does get to a point where I got to soak it in some acetone because it'll get so much crap in it that it just makes everything nasty and dirty. But I usually soak it in some acetone and get rid of that. But I keep all the old Scotch-Brite rotary, what do they call them?
Little pads?
Yeah, I can't, but there's a specific name for them. I can't remember what they're called. But
the lock type.
Roll-lock wheel. Yeah, that's what they are. Roll-lock. So I run them suckers until there's nothing left, right? But that's what I use them for, is blocks like that have rust on them. It'll clean them up pretty good, especially on the machine surfaces. And then where it's the casting, I get after it with a wire wheel. Nothing seriously aggressive, right? You just go get a pack of cheapy wire wheels at Lowe's, probably made out of some of China's finest metal, but it's definitely generally softer than the block. And all it's going to do is polish the stuff up, and then you'll know exactly what you have. But I don't think there's really such thing as too much rust unless it's rusted through, or rusted pitted in. They'll generally just surface rust, and you can clean it off. Okay, let's see if we can catch up. I'm sure I'm way behind now. And I do like, all right, so here's another thing that nobody throws out there. The old rule of thumb for hot rodders from the 50s and 60s, nobody ever went and got a new block. They used what they call a season block, right? A season block was an old school engine that had a bazillion miles on it. And the thing was, it had been through so many heat cycles that the block has settled. And then you would do your machine work on that block because it has settled. And when you do a new block, it hasn't had any runs on it. And so it hasn't actually been through any heat cycles. It hasn't settled. It hasn't worked itself in. The season block, right? There used to be guys that, like, my dad's friend, his name was Tooney. His name was actually Mark Reinhardt, but we call him Tooney. And he would take old Pontiac big blocks and throw them in the bed of his truck, right? He would disassemble them and throw them in the bed of his truck and get rust on them and let them get rained on and the whole 9 yards, bounce around in the back of the truck. And then it's seasoned, right? And that would be his trick to seasoning a block. If you really wanted to make sure that it's fully seasoned, that's how you do it. And I mean, there's a lot of years of experience that it took to develop that when you're talking about people that didn't have an education beyond high school, right? It had just basic science, and that was what led to the seasoned block. It had settled. I'm kind of interested in wanting to know what did Bob Glidden used to use, because that would be the guy that probably had it right. Work on a low budget. He built them on a table. He didn't use an engine stand because it would cause the block to flex. And when you tighten all the bolts down, it would stay flexed in that spot. So I wonder what Bob Glidden would used to use. I bet it was a seasoned block. But all right. So Tony's Hot Rod Garage, when I was dirt track racing, the only rockers I could get to hold up on my 408s was the Hughes T&D style 155 rockers.
Yeah, there was actually a comment up earlier. He was talking about the rocker arms, but yeah, 155 rockers to make it survive the high RPMs, the opening cylinder pressures. Two Hacks saying the Edelbrock STR series cross rams were decent, but the price on them is expensive if you can find one. A lot of that early Edelbrock stuff, like a UR19, is like freaking stupid money now. Don't get me wrong, I love a cross ram. It just has to be. It has to be tuned in, I mean, that's the only difference. If you got the time to tune it in.
Oh, let's see. Okay. Am I not caught up? Oh, I'm totally caught up. Okay. All right. Bicycle Guy 111 saying, I'm having the guys at my work. I'm a power plant operator, sandblast it with some aluminum media that's fairly gentle. Thanks a lot for the info, guys. Hey, you know what? All right, I'm going to tell you something. Hopefully, don't do that yet. I got a block like that. I got a block that had been blasted, and I didn't think nothing of it. And I did all the oiling mods on the dang thing, and it turned it upside down a million times doing the oiling mods on it. And every time I did that, shit would fall out. And that blast media gets in there, and it gets stuck in there, and you can't get it out. Me personally, I would never blast a block. Don't blast a block. Just take it and have it cleaned at the machine shop if that's the case. But I would not blast it. You're going to have more time in trying to get that shit out of there and out of the oiling passages and the water jackets than you are anything else.
Honestly, how I clean blocks, I clean them at home with a pressure washer. Literally just with some... The wife has this degreaser. I forget what it is. You get it at Home Depot, and it works really good. And it's like an organic style one, one that can go down the drain. It works really good. And I just pressure wash it. I use that, and then I just WD-40 it. And then before I go and build it, I ATF it with coffee filters, to get all the stuff off of it. That works the best.
Yeah, I clean mine at home with the hose, except for I hook the hose up to the hot water heater. And then I just open the drain at the bottom of the hot water heater, and the water comes out at 95, 100 degrees or whatever. And the warmer it is, the easier it is to get most of the stuff off.
Yeah,
is what I found. I really want to try that because that's like my cheap trick of having warm water to clean it with. I wouldn't mind getting a pressure washer and hook it up to that drain on my coming out of my hot water heater. See how that does. It'd be like a semi-heated, almost like a hot seat, but not quite as hot. See what would happen.
Yeah.
Let's see. Dust Double Garage says, my problem with the Magnum heads is finding manifolds. Do you think it'd be hard to make a jig to re-drill them to Magnum bolt pattern? I don't want to pay Hughes $200 for this.
No, because they just go straight down. Literally, it just goes straight down. I think the hardest thing is not necessarily the jig. It would be getting the piece of aluminum that you would need to bolt in there. So when you bolt it down, it puts an even pressure on it. But yes, I agree with you. But I believe just for most people, a dual plane Edelbrock Performer RPM would be the best. Oh, the wife is saying it's called Crud Cutter. Crud Cutter is the name of that stuff. It's at Home Depot, and it's in the paint department. It works amazingly well. In fact, all the engines that I've built since I've been here, I've done it with Crud Cutter, and it comes out pretty good. Yeah, it's awesome.
I don't use any of that hippie stuff. I go straight to like the first thing I use is this purple degreaser you buy at Lowe's called Zep Industrial Strength Purple Degreaser.
This works better than that.
Really?
Yes, I'm telling you. I didn't believe it until I tried. I've tried them both side back to back. This Crud Cutter stuff works amazing, and you can either dilute it slightly or not. And you know, I've tried to stop using all brake cleaner altogether. I only keep like one can in the side, but I use this for everything at different mixtures, at different dilutions, and it works on everything. So,
see, I start with just basic old kerosene to soften up the grease.
Yeah.
And then I go after it with that purple, and it will come out. It'll actually flash rust in front of your face. That's how you know you got it clean.
Yeah.
When it starts to flash rust.
That's exactly what happens. That's why you get the WD-40 right off the bat. And the Crud Cutter doesn't have any smell or fumes or anything, and it doesn't mess up your hands.
I do know that purple degreaser, when I dump it out in my grass, the worms will crawl straight out of the ground. So it probably can't be good. Mostly old parts and rust. Shane, will the Edelbrock Magnum head valve train hold up to 7,500 RPM, or would I need a stud girl?
Well, 7,500 RPM and boost. None of the rock arms even the shaft system for the LA is going to have a hard time handling that, because it's going to be, once again, you're going to, if call me up and we'll get you set up for what you're going to need, because I understand where you're trying to go. You want 7,500 RPM, and I think we passed one of his posts, but he was talking about almost 30 pounds of boost. You're getting into an area that is literally race car oriented, and the biggest issue you're going to have at that point is the 59-degree lifter to the push rod, that 11-degree offset that you're going to have an issue with. And that's the biggest problem with anything a small block Mopar when you start putting boost on them is that problem right there. If you call me up, Patrick, we'll talk about this, and I'll get you set up on this. But I would set realistic goals. I would say 25 pounds of boost and 7,000 RPM. Because then once you cross over that threshold for what you're trying to do, it's going to get rather expensive. And if this is what you're looking for, I would actually probably move on to a Gen 3 Hemi personally. It's just my opinion.
Tony's Hot Rod Garage is recommending that you use the T&D rocker shaft, or the shaft rockers. It'll be 7,500, no problem. But I'm assuming you are going to have to shorten up that the rocker arm ratio.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting at. So he's going to have to go to a shaft mount rocker. Definitely a stud girl is definitely not going to do it, especially if you're running a solid roller style of lifter on there. It's going to be a little heavier. Plus, you're going to have to compensate for the amount of boost, because you're going to have that amount of boost on the backside of the intake valve also. So if you have 30 pounds of boost, you're going to lose that much seat pressure, so you got to compensate for that. Then you're going to have to know the efficiency of the turbo, because then you're going to have the exact same problem holding, 2-to-1, boost ratio on the backside of the exhaust valve. So your seat pressures come into issues because, you just do the same type of math. If you have a 202 intake valve, take 202 divided by 2 pi, and then times it by pi. Then you times it by your boost, and that's quick math. Now it's 100%, but it's quick math. Will tell you how much seat pressure you're going to lose when you're under that amount of boost. Once you get over 20 to 25 pounds, it really gets exponential at that point. So a 202 valve, and then you'll start losing almost 100 pounds of seat pressure. So you're going to start hanging valves open, and then you're going to start fluttering valves, and you'll get to a point where you can just cram all the boost you want to, and it just won't make any more power because it just can't hold the valves closed.
Right. And for those folks that may or may not be following, it's working the opposite of what we were talking about before on the rocker side, on the exhaust rocker side, because it's now applying boost pressure on the back side of the intake valve, making your 150-pound valve spring with 30 pounds of boost against it into a 120-pound of valve spring. But it's actually less than that because the valve is so much bigger.
Yes, I'll do it real quick. I have the wrong calculator here. I have my phone calculator, so it's terrible to do this kind of stuff. But
Yeah, well, you're looking at a 202 valve, which is essentially 2 inches in diameter, right? If it has 30 pounds of boost on it and 2 inches in diameter, that's 30 pounds per square inch. So that's 60 pounds of pressure on the backside of that valve, making your spring into essentially like if it was 150 before, now it's 90.
Yeah, 96. Basically, it's 96.1 pounds at 30 pounds of boost on a 202. That's how much spring pressure you're going to lose on the seat. So there you go.
Wow. Wow. And Andy just showed up from Unity Motorsports Garage. Says sorry he's late.
Oh.
We're not sorry that you're late. You had to get out there and make some videos driving Casper around. We know how that's got to be fun.
I watched that little short of you of it starting up. That thing sounds awesome.
Wait till you see the one where he's driving around, dude. You got to go watch that one. It's doing burnouts just like trying to take off from a stop sign.
Is that race still going on between him and Tony? I mean, I'm not trying to bring.
Oh, I think so. As far as I know, it is. I don't know. I haven't watched any Tony stuff for a while, just because I just haven't any time. But I think the last thing I saw, Tony had bottle rocket up and running. He was spraying it and saying, "Are you ready, Andy?" And I think that's the last thing I watched. So, yeah. John Wilburn says we mentioned the UR19 intake and Andy appears. It's funny. Yeah.
Poof. His ears are burning.
Yeah. Let's see. Max Wedge Dick Datcherly says I notched an LA intake and put it on my 97 Magnum, never leaked.
Yeah, but you can do it. They used to sell a little aluminum blocks that you could put in there, and they were drilled, and you just drilled it straight down. You plop this thing in, and you put it right down. So yeah, you can do it.
Well, Chevrolet's had them too, right? Remember it was like that weird 87 to 92 cylinder head or something that had those bowls in the center, straight up and down instead of at an angle. They sold like, you could buy these little aluminum blocks that went down over that hole, and then you would drill them straight down, right?
Yeah.
And then you just run your bolts in there, and then you could use that Chevrolet intake on either one of them.
Yeah, I did this a long time ago when I was actually living at the pallet house. Yeah.
So Michael Roberts says I may fool around with Tri-Power and Roots superchargers. Have 2 small block Fords and 1 small block Chevy to build up. Thanks for all the thoughts. No problem. That's what this whole show is all about. It's food for thought and try to help you out.
Yeah.
We kind of encounter the same thing, and the only reason Shane and I are up here doing it is because you didn't apply for the job. That's all. I mean, we're just like you.
Yeah.
We're not know-it-alls, that's for sure. Some of the stuff I had never even heard of. Andy's all about that UR19. So mostly old parts and Russ Patrick says he's been 7,100 RPM on 21 PSI on stock Magnum iron heads. Yeah,
it will do it, but for how long? See, when you start really building what you're trying to build, the next setup, 7,500 RPM, and like I was saying, that 25 to 30 pounds of boost. This right now, what you're doing, 7,000 to 20 PSI, that's what I was telling you. That is the tipping point. Once you get over these numbers here, that 7,000 RPM and 20 PSI, once you get over that, you're starting to get into territory where the Mopars, just the small blocks, you have to really have them set up correctly to survive. And really, it's the 59-degree lifter. There's many different factors that go into this, but I can help you out. We'll get you worked out, but I just want you to know it's not going to survive for a very long time doing that.
Well, I don't see any more questions. Dust Oval Garage is saying that Brian says, wait, I run a giant CNC machine. Why can't I just make the blocks you're talking about? Yes, you probably can. I bet if you just Google them, they're going to come up with a picture that you see those aluminum blocks. They're nothing more than just almost a squared off block with a hole drilled in it.
Yeah, that's exactly what they are. I'm actually trying to look on the intake on intake manifolds here on Hughes. I remember they used to have them. I don't know.
What's funny is all that stuff parts that were around in like 2001 or 2, those are already not made.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. You know what? You're absolutely right, because I'm looking here and it's like I don't even see them. Yeah, I don't know.
That's weird. Yeah, see if you can find a picture of the Chevrolet ones, like that 87 to 92 TBI head. Remember those weird ones that had the weird bolt holes in the center?
Yeah, they went straight down. Yeah,
Yeah. And there was intakes that came with that hole like oblonged out, and then you could get that little block would come with it, or you could just buy the blocks and put the block up over yours and then drill that hole. Use it as a guide. You'd put a bolt down through one of them, and then you'd use the other one as a guide and drill it down through. Yeah, let's say Andy, everyone. So Max Wedge Dick Dashley says, Andy, everyone needs dual quads. LO race cars all have two carbs. I would agree with you there. Man, I'll tell you what, I guess I could never consider it. Like maybe the big block Buick would be available, but the small block Buick, they don't even make a dual quad manifold for it or anything for it. Matter of fact, there was only one intake manifold up to 3 years ago, and then somebody made a single plane. So
I'm just not having luck with Google searches today, because it's definitely not coming up any of those little blocks. But yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. Danny Boyd's saying, weren't those Vortec heads with the center bolted rocker covers? Well, it was the generation before the Vortec. It was the
Fast burn, wasn't it called the fast burn?
I think it was fast burn, but we used to call them center bolt Chevrolets, right?
Yeah.
Because it was like 87 to 93 or something, 94 maybe. They were all center bolt valve cover heads, just like the Vortec, except for they had a regular port arrangement like a small block Chevrolet, except for the very two center bolt holes, where instead of them being drilled at like a 45-degree angle on the intake manifold, was like straight up and down. And it was the only thing that they changed. Mm-hmm. And it really screwed you up when you went to buy an intake manifold, because all the small block Chevrolets had been the same for a billion years. And all of a sudden they changed that one thing, and everybody was freaking out like, how do you get this to fit? And somebody came up with that genius idea with those aluminum blocks that just sit like right on the, I don't know what you would call it, the mounting boss for the bolt. Mm-hmm. It just sat on top of there, and instead of going at an angle, they weren't perfectly square. They had like a beveled bottom that sat on that traditional angled intake manifold bolt. Yeah. And it allowed it to square it up, and then you could drill down through it and make it straight. Let's see. Jody Pearson says, what do you think about a stock short rod 400 pistons mounted on a 6-inch rod connected to a 350 crank to make a poor man's 377? Cheap horsepower.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the downside to this thing? I want to say small block Chevrolets, the 383 crank was a 400 crank that somebody turned the mains down. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So a 350 crank will not fit in a 400 without having a main spacer, yeah. And a lot of people won't run those. The reason why the expensive man's 377 was essentially a big journaled small block Chevy crank that normally fit the 400s, and I think they do require that different.
Yeah, they
have different main bearing size.
Yeah,
they do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, if you wanted to be, well, actually, no. I was gonna say if you wanted to be cheap about it, you could probably the cheapest way you could probably do it is run a spacer on the block half, and then run an aftermarket main cap that's for a standard small block Chevrolet journal, and then try to line bore that or line hone it. Yeah, but I think the problem you're going to have is that I think when they get the bigger main bearings like that, the bolts go farther apart, and it will never line up. I don't think you even could put the cap on there.
Yeah, it would be kind of I don't know. I mean, it could probably work. I mean, people have done it. I've used spacers when when people get a 360 block and they have their 340 crank or 318 crank. So I've put spacers in them and they do work, but you're limited as far as RPM goes. And the whole point of making one of these 377s is big bore, short stroke, high RPM. So I wouldn't trust it. I mean,
I think the cheapest way to do that one, I do believe, is probably going to be like, see if you can find a steel crank for a small block Chevrolet and have the mains welded up.
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, Ohio Crankshaft will do that for you.
Yeah, and I think that's the only way to really do it is for on the cheap. Is just get a steel 350 crank, have the mains welded up, turn it back down to the regular standard size, and it'll fit in that 400 block. But remember, when you start mixing and matching stuff like that, you need to know the compression height, connecting rod, stroke, the whole 9 yards. You need to, and Chevrolet small block is all pretty good because they all have the same deck height, right? That makes it fairly simple.
Yeah.
And especially when you you could put your 6-inch rod combo, but I don't know if a regular off the shelf 400 piston would do it. But you may be able to just find some stroker small block Chevrolet piston or like, let's say a lot of aftermarket blocks have that same 125 bore, right? A lot of them do. And I'm sure there's some pistons available that you could probably put something together and have less than, I don't know, $2,500 in it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here.
Kevin's
saying TBI engines, Edelbrock makes a manifold now. Yeah, the TBI did have its own weird center bolts. Okay.
Colleen asked a question.
Which one? Colleen?
The very last one. Yeah. Colleen?
Okay.
Yeah.
If you accidentally mixed up 2 flat tappet lifters, how detrimental would it be? 3,000 miles on cam and lifters. It doesn't really matter about miles. It could be 300,000 or 3. If you accidentally mix them up, well, my answer to that would be like, take those 2 if you weren't sure about it out and throw them in the trash. Go buy 2 lifters and run a cam break-in on it again. That's what I would do, and that would ensure that you're probably not going to have a cam failure.
Yeah. Just break the cam in again. That's what I was waiting to say too. Is that I would take those 2 that you're unsure about and make sure it's the only 2, because if you have 2 that you're questioning, there could be more. But if it's just 2, just change those 2 lifters out and re-break the cam in.
Yeah, I think that's the only surefire way to do it. I mean, if you didn't want to flatten the cam and you weren't sure about it, that's the only way to fix that without. And I hate to say that, but you're only wasting essentially 2 lifters. If you got the other 14 figured out, it probably is not much of an issue. I would just do that. That's
On a completely separate note, I've actually put bags and I wrote down the numbers on the lifters, onto the camshaft. And when I put them back in, I was putting them back in backwards because I had written all the numbers and the numbers had come off with the Sharpie. I put them in there and I didn't realize it until after about a week after I'd already been running it. Like, oh, wow, I did this and I didn't have an issue. So,
yeah, see, even Tista Speed Shop saying the same thing. Junk the lifter, get new and re-break it in.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Jody Pearson, I've used 2 different used cams without matching the lifters with the lobes, and it's been fine. Knock on wood. Man, that is walking through a landmine with no freaking detector.
Yeah. I've done that. I've done it.
I've done garbage stuff too, where I just throw something together, and it's like you're hoping that it holds together. But man, I'm telling you, with today's oils and the lifters and the camshafts out there, that's literally walking on a land. Okay. Let's look at it like this. If you don't wipe it, what did you save? A couple $100. Okay. If you do wipe the cam, what did you save? What do you lose? Right? Probably remachining the crank. Right? Because all that lifter material is hard and steel, and that shit goes right through the bearings like no problem. And it galls up the crank fast. All new bearings. You get all the time, the gaskets, all that. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. right?
Right.
I try not to.
If you have a question, just buy it again at that
I
point.
tiptoe around that stuff so much because it is so failure prone these days.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. 51 Flat is saying, great show. I have a 12-year-old who wants to be an auto mechanic. Can you suggest a book that may keep his interest? I tell you what, there's a guy within our community that actually writes books. His
I
name
was
is
just gonna
David
say.
Vizard. You need to go get a couple of books from David Vizard. And if it's a little, because he's a young kid, is going to be hard to keep their interest, especially like, after they see his cell phone and iPad and all that stuff. David is very technical, but I would not say his book is, if his book is anything like the videos, it's going to be very tech heavy and less excitement. Okay.
Mhm.
You've got to really be into tech to not fall asleep, or it's not, bad on the dude. It's very focused on tech stuff, which is not very exciting.
Also, too, I understand that reading a book, I think that's awesome, but I think a 12-year-old would probably learn a lot more. We have a great community of people on YouTube now. That there are people out there that are just putting up crap on YouTube, but there's a lot of people who are putting up really good content that are less known. I would look for those people because they're, you could really learn a lot on YouTube if he wants to watch some videos. But I'm about him reading a book too, because that way he always has that knowledge. But I would say just look at some of the YouTube videos too, especially some of the people that are in our chat here. All of them are really good people.
In his next comment down, he says his 12-year-old grandson. All right, so if it was me, it's 12 years old. It's hard to keep their attention when they're that young.
Mm-hmm.
I would do something really freaking cool. You remember the thing that you remember that Slant 6 or small block Chevrolet model? When the grandson's over at your house, you and him sit down and put that together. And he will be freaking elated by that thing, especially if it's the one where it's got the motor on it and it runs and it moves around and all that stuff. I think that'd be the way to get him into it. And then you start throwing the books at him once you see that he's really got the interest.
Yeah. Or, what we did when my very first class I took was a small engines class. And our very first thing is we read about a Briggs & Stratton flathead, essentially, type of engine. And then we rebuilt one. Why don't you do, like, say, a father-son or grandson project? Go buy one of these engines from Harbor Freight, tear it apart, put it back together, and start it. I mean, that would be an awesome thing. He would learn everything he needs to know about engines that way.
And it wouldn't take any longer than maybe 2-3 hours.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. Then that would be like a weekend project. You guys can take it apart one time. You can show him what all these parts are, then have him put it back together and explain it to you. And then that way he has it. It's been hands-on, and that way you teach him. That's the way I would do it. And watch some of these videos from some of these guys that just look at some of these guys. There's a lot of people right here that have great content.
Well, so Throttle Davidson says, hey guys, I got a stock 361 big block Mopar. Any suggestions on a good street strip cam with stock heads, Offenhauser single plane intake combos in mind? Ooh.
Yeah. Well, 361 big block Mopar, basically just look at it as a 360 with a little bit better heads. It's essentially, on that style of head with that engine. So basically any camshaft that's going to be in the a great street strip, 236, 240, put it on a 108, 110 LSA, and that thing's going to thump away and be awesome. I would really not do much with the 361. I would try to get a 383 personally, because that way you can take a little bit bigger bore, or even a 400 at that point.
Well, Kevin's saying, will cam grinders regrind a cam for an antique engine? Yes.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Matter of fact, Professor P did one for me that I sent him, was big block Buick camshaft. It wasn't a factory camshaft, but I did have it reground. They do that no problem at the cam manufacturers. Now it depends on what the engine is and if they have the masters. What do you call the masters for it, Shane?
Yeah, masters. On something like this, especially an old antique engine, typically how it's done is that they would make most places are going to be running, like, say, a Burco. And what they'll do is they'll use a follower and they'll make a profile of that cam profile, a master of it. And then what they'll do is they'll clean it up, and then they can either expand that, like, say, 4, 10, 15 degrees or whatever you're trying to do. And they can expand that bigger or smaller. Or once they profile it, they can see basically the data points where it's at, the speed and the velocity of the curve. And then they might have something on hand that would be relatively better and cut down some of those crazy velocities that you see in some of these things, because a lot of the antique engines were like, they didn't really understand what they're doing on the camshafts at that point. It was just kind of like open valve, closed valve. So you could actually slow a lot of these speeds down and still get more air into the curve, and it just runs better overall as far as the camshaft. So there's a lot of companies do that.
There's a lot of stuff that's popped up here. 51 Flatty says he had the visible V8. Let's see, Dust Devil Garage. There's a video game called Car Mechanic Simulator. It's actually really good and would keep his interest until he gets older. Tony's Hot Rod Garage says that's absolutely the best way to learn is hands-on, right? Let's see. Then Maxwell Dick Dashley said that's a good idea. And it's talking about, that your Predator engine teardown. And so 51 Flatty saying, thanks, guys. Great ideas. I hate to say it, but we're at the 2-hour mark. This episode just flew by.
Rock on!
It literally flew by. Thanks so much for the tech questions. And, the audience out there, you guys are the greatest audience. This community is hands down, bar none, the best place to get the most valuable information on YouTube for the automotive community. So thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And that way you can be, ring the bell so that you can be notified every time we go live on Wednesday, which is at 7:00 Central Time. Every Wednesday, Shane and I try to do it. We only missed one Wednesday.
One Wednesday.
Yeah, and that was what?
I missed it when I was on Drag Week.
Okay, that's what it was, and I still did it, but it was terrible. It was hard for me to just do it by myself. But no, I ended up having some guests jump in there. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't the same. I don't know. It's it's not the same vibe. It's a different person, so it changes the vibe of the whole thing. So, but we will see you next week with another awesome Wednesday Night Tech Talk Live, and hopefully we'll have our new intro done. So
And I got one more thing to say, guys. If there was a question that you didn't want to put up in the chats, and some people want to ask questions and they're really worried about people actually talking about it, on there, you can send it to slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. There was 3 people that emailed me during the live here, and I actually answered their questions right there live because they didn't want me to spout it up. It's no big deal. So send it over and we'll go from there.
Well, so John Wilbur saying that myself and Deke Denny, which is our AHRA tech guy, is going to be on John's channel on January the 13th. We'll talk about passing drag strip tech especially for you No Name Nationals fans. They're going to be there. But until next week, Shane and I are out of here.
That's right. You guys take it easy. Thanks for showing up.
Later.
All right. Bye-bye.
We're out.